The mansion pulsed with life as the party reached its peak. Guests laughed and mingled under the ambient glow of expensive lighting, champagne glasses glittering in their hands. But John Legend and Chrissy Teigen knew that the real excitement lay beyond the main floor, where only a chosen few were allowed. They'd heard whispers of Diddy's infamous Essence Room, a private chamber reserved for his closest inner circle and his darkest indulgences. Tonight, Diddy had personally invited them to experience it. Diddy, dressed in a sleek tailored suit, leaned against the grand staircase, a smug smile on his face as he scanned the room. He gave John a subtle nod, signaling it was time to clear out the uninvited. John exchanged a glance with Chrissy, then turned to address the crowd with a warm, charming smile. "Folks, it's been an amazing night," he announced, raising his glass. "But for a few of us, the night is only just beginning." Some of the guests chuckled, lifting their glasses in return, while others exchanged glances, sensing the underlying meaning in John's words. Chrissy moved through the room, gently but firmly guiding a few guests toward the exits, her polite smile belying the finality of her gestures. A few murmured in protest, but Diddy's reputation was enough to keep them from questioning. One by one they filtered out, until the main hall was empty, leaving only Diddy, John, and Chrissy. Once the last stragglers were gone, Diddy's smile widened, his eyes gleaming with an eerie excitement. "Now," he murmured, his voice smooth as silk, "the real party can begin." He gestured for John and Chrissy to follow, leading them down a narrow, dimly lit hallway far from the lively music and chatter. The walls here were lined with dark, heavy curtains that seemed to absorb any sound, leaving the hallway eerily silent. John felt a flicker of unease as they walked, his instincts urging him to turn back, but Chrissy's excitement was contagious. She squeezed his hand, her eyes bright with anticipation. "Come on, babe," she whispered, her voice low and coaxing. "We've heard so much about this. Let's see what Diddy's been hiding." At the end of the hall, they reached a large black door with a brass handle that gleamed under the flickering candlelight. Diddy paused, glancing over his shoulder with a smirk before opening the door and gesturing them inside. The room beyond was dim and intimate, with walls draped in dark red velvet. A single leather armchair sat in the center, illuminated by a soft spotlight. In the chair sat a young rapper, known for his swagger and talent, the latest sensation to rise up in Diddy's orbit. He looked around nervously, fidgeting as if he sensed he was somewhere he shouldn't be. When he noticed John and Chrissy, he managed a small uncertain smile as though hoping for reassurance. Diddy strode over to the rapper, placing a hand on his shoulder in a way that seemed both comforting and possessive. "Relax, kid," he said in a low, calming voice. "You're here to experience something special, something transcendent." The rapper forced a chuckle, looking around the room with wide eyes. "I mean, yeah, if you say so, man. This is just different, you know?" Chrissy leaned into John, a glimmer of excitement in her eyes. "Isn't this thrilling?" she whispered. "To see this side of things? I've always wanted to know what Diddy's real parties are like." John nodded, though he felt a gnawing sense of dread creeping up his spine. He watched as Diddy's hand tightened on the rapper's shoulder, his fingers digging into the young man's skin with an intensity that seemed almost unnatural. "Tonight," Diddy murmured, his voice barely above a whisper but carrying a weight that filled the room, "you'll understand what it means to be truly great." The rapper's eyes flickered with confusion, but Diddy's gaze held him captive, an unseen force keeping him still. Slowly, a strange dark mist began to seep from Diddy's hand, swirling around his fingers and curling toward the rapper. The mist seemed to move with a life of its own, wrapping itself around the young man like tendrils of smoke. He gasped, his body tensing as the mist began to seep into his skin, his eyes widening in terror. What's happening?" he stammered, his voice faint, barely audible. John's breath hitched, his pulse racing as he watched the rapper struggle. The young man's skin grew pale, his eyes losing their spark as the life seemed to drain out of him, pulled into Diddy like water sucked into a vortex. Diddy's face contorted in ecstasy, his eyes half closed, his expression one of twisted satisfaction, as he absorbed the young rapper's essence, his vitality. Beside him, Chrissy watched with an intensity that made John shiver. Her breathing quickened, her eyes bright with fascination as she took in every detail, seemingly entranced by the spectacle before them. She turned to John, her voice a breathy whisper. "Do you feel it?" she murmured, her gaze never leaving Diddy. That power, the thrill, isn't it incredible? John looked at her, struggling to process the strange dark excitement he saw on her face. He tried to pull away, his instinct screaming at him to run, but Chrissy's hand tightened around his, holding him in place. Her eyes sparkled, urging him to watch, to give in to the twisted allure of the scene before them. The rapper's body slumped, his face slack and empty as the last of his essence flowed into Diddy. Diddy straightened, releasing his grip on the young man, who was now little more than a lifeless shell. The dark mist dissipated, leaving the air thick and heavy with an unholy energy that hung over the room like a shroud. Diddy turned to John and Chrissy, his face calm, almost serene, as though he'd just taken part in something sacred. He met John's gaze, his eyes glinting with a dark, predatory satisfaction. "Power," he said, his voice soft but carrying an intensity that resonated in John's chest. "Real power isn't about money or fame. It's about taking what you want, making it yours." Chrissy shivered beside John, leaning into him, her eyes shining with dark excitement. John felt the pull of it, the seductive allure of that control, that raw, overwhelming power. Part of him wanted to turn away, to leave and never look back, but Chrissy's presence anchored him, her fascination feeding his own curiosity, drawing him deeper into the darkness. Diddy stepped closer, his gaze locked onto John's, reading his hesitation, sensing the shift within him. "You feel it too, don't you?" he asked, his voice hypnotic, drawing John in. "The rush, the thrill of consuming someone else's energy, their essence. It's like nothing else." John swallowed, his throat dry, but he couldn't deny the strange pull he felt, the magnetic allure of the power he'd just witnessed. Slowly, almost against his will, he nodded, the last traces of resistance fading from his eyes. Beside him, Chrissy's smile widened, her hand still wrapped tightly around his, her eyes filled with satisfaction. She leaned in close, her voice a low, sultry whisper in his ear. "Now you understand," she murmured, her tone laced with excitement. "This is the real party, John. We're in it now." Diddy's grin widened, his gaze shifting between them, pleased with what he saw. He gestured to the now empty shell of the young rapper slumped in the chair, his voice a soft, ominous whisper. "There are more like him," Diddy said, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. "And now, we're just getting started." As the weight of his words settled over John, he felt himself slipping deeper into this world, drawn into the intoxicating darkness that he'd once feared but now found irresistible. And with Chrissy by his side, he knew there was no turning back. The Essence Room had claimed him, just as it had claimed so many before. Jenna couldn't believe her luck. She and her best friend, Rhea, had just been invited to Diddy's party. They were new to LA, just two Instagram models trying to make it big. They'd heard whispers about these parties, the ones only the biggest celebrities got into, the ones that felt more like a secret club than a regular event. They arrived at the mansion late at night, eyes wide as they took in the towering gates and sprawling grounds. Everything looked luxurious, too good to be real. When they stepped out of the car, a valet greeted them, taking their names and waving them inside. "Can you believe this?" Rhea whispered, her excitement barely contained. "This is it, Jenna. We're finally here." Jenna nodded, smiling, but she couldn't shake the strange feeling in her stomach. The mansion felt too big, too empty despite the crowd inside. The music was low, more like a heartbeat than actual tunes, and there was an energy in the air that made her shiver. She'd expected wild lights and people dancing, but the guests were scattered, watching each other more than enjoying the party. Jenna tried to brush off her nerves. It was Diddy's party, after all, and she was determined to enjoy it. She and Rhea mingled, moving from room to room, trying to catch the eye of anyone who might help them break into the industry. Then, halfway through the night, a tall man in a black suit walked over to them. "Diddy would like you to join him in the VIP room," he said, his voice low. Jenna's heart skipped a beat. She glanced at Rhea, who looked equally shocked but thrilled. This was their chance. They followed the man down a long, dimly lit hallway, past several closed doors. The deeper they went, the quieter it became, until the music and laughter were just faint sounds behind them. Jenna's earlier excitement started to fade, replaced by a growing sense of unease. The man finally stopped in front of a heavy wooden door and opened it, nodding for them to enter. The room was dark, with velvet curtains lining the walls and a large round table in the center. Sitting at the table was Diddy himself, along with an A-list actor Jenna recognized immediately, someone whose face was plastered on every magazine cover. He looked at them with a strange, unreadable expression. "Come in, ladies," Diddy said, gesturing to 2 empty seats. His voice was smooth but carried a strange weight. Jenna noticed he wasn't smiling. They sat down, glancing nervously at each other as Diddy and the actor watched them, silent and intense. There was something wrong with their expressions, like they were studying Jenna and Rhea, sizing them up. "So," Diddy finally said, breaking the silence, "you two want to be part of this world?" Rhea nodded eagerly. "Yes, absolutely. We've been working so hard and we're just looking for an opportunity." Diddy smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You know, this business isn't just about looks or talent. It's about commitment, sacrifice." He glanced at the actor, who gave a slow, knowing nod. Jenna's mouth felt dry, her heart thumping. She'd heard stories about the lengths people went to in Hollywood, but this felt different, darker. "What kind of sacrifice?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Diddy leaned forward, his gaze fixed on her. "The kind that shows you're willing to give yourself completely to this life. Not everyone can handle it." He paused, glancing at Rhea. "But you might be different." Jenna's stomach turned, a heavy feeling settling over her as she realized he wasn't joking. Diddy's eyes held a strange intensity, like he was daring them to go further. Rhea, sensing an opportunity, spoke up. "I'm ready for whatever it takes," she said, her voice steady. Jenna shot her a worried look, but Rhea ignored it, her gaze locked on Diddy and the actor. The actor smiled, a strange, unsettling smile, and stood up, moving to stand behind Rhea's chair. "Well then," he murmured, his hands resting on Rhea's shoulders. "Let's begin." Before Jenna could react, the lights in the room dimmed even further, the shadows seeming to creep in around them. The air felt heavy, like a storm was about to break. Jenna tried to get up, but her legs felt weak, her mind foggy. She looked over at Rhea, who was sitting perfectly still, as if in a trance. "Rhea," Jenna whispered, her voice shaking. But Rhea didn't respond. Her eyes were wide, unfocused, as if she were staring at something only she could see. Diddy's voice cut through the silence. "The Hollywood life is more than fame, more than fortune," he said softly, his gaze fixed on Rhea. "It required a deeper commitment, one that few understand." The man behind Rhea leaned down, his mouth close to her ear. Jenna saw his lips move, murmuring something she couldn't hear, something that made Rhea's expression go blank. Rhea's face went pale, her breathing shallow as the room seemed to darken even more. Jenna wanted to scream, to pull her friend out of the chair, but she was frozen, unable to move, trapped by the weight of the room, by the way Diddy and the man stared at Rhea as if she were some kind of prize. She tried to reach out, but her hand wouldn't obey, her fingers numb. The man's hands moved from Rhea's shoulders to her neck, pressing lightly, and Jenna saw a strange, dark mist start to rise from his fingers, curling around Rhea's face. The mist was thick and oily, moving with a life of its own, and Rhea's eyes fluttered shut, her body slumping as if her very essence were being drained. "Rhea!" Jenna managed to choke out, her voice weak, but her friend didn't respond. The mist continued to seep from the man's hands, wrapping around Rhea, consuming her. Jenna could only watch, helpless and horrified, as Rhea's skin grew paler, her body sagging in the chair, her life slipping away. Diddy's gaze turned to Jenna, a faint smile on his lips. "She wanted it," he said softly, as if he were explaining something simple. "And in this world, you don't get to ask questions. You just accept." The man gave Jenna a strange, hollow smile. "Welcome to Hollywood," he whispered, his words barely audible. The room grew colder, the shadows closing in as Jenna's vision blurred. Her mind filled with the image of her friend, lifeless and empty in the chair beside her. She realized too late that they'd been invited here not as guests, but as sacrifices to something she couldn't understand. As her world faded into darkness, Jenna understood one final, horrifying truth. Some parties in Hollywood were meant to take more than they ever gave, and tonight she and Rhea had given everything. It was a miracle that Ben even got in. Diddy's birthday party was invite only, packed with celebrities. industry elites, and the most influential people in Hollywood. For weeks, Ben had been trying every connection he had to secure an invitation, but each lead had been a dead end, until his girlfriend Elise came through. Elise was an assistant to Diddy's personal assistant, a position that barely granted her access to Diddy himself, but she'd managed to get him a pass. Ben was an independent journalist with a reputation for his hard-hitting stories about the entertainment industry's darker side. He'd published exposés on corruption, fame, and abuse in Hollywood, each story earning him new enemies and quiet warnings. The idea of attending Diddy's infamous birthday party was too good to pass up, especially with the stories that circled about what really went on at these events. "This is it, Ben," Elise had told him, handing over the glossy invitation. "You're going to be in the same room as some of the biggest names in Hollywood. It's your chance to see the truth up close." Ben had been skeptical. Elise had never fully understood his drive to uncover the twisted underbelly of Hollywood, nor why he seemed to obsess over each new scandal and rumor. But she'd been persistent, urging him to go, even if just for the experience. She'd encouraged him, reassured him, and in the end, he had given in. She'd always been a grounding presence in his life, her belief in him calming his nerves, and tonight, she was his ticket to everything he'd been chasing. The mansion loomed over them as they entered, its tall, shadowy form a testament to wealth and power. Ben could feel the history in its walls, a place where countless secrets had been whispered and buried. The entire property was cloaked in a strange, almost sacred atmosphere, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was entering a place where reality and myth blurred. Inside, the party was in full swing. Guests milled around in designer suits and gowns, each face more famous than the last. Ben spotted actors, musicians, and influencers among the crowd, all of them mingling as if they were the only people that mattered. The rooms were decorated with black and gold, champagne flowed freely, and soft music played in the background. It was elegant, upscale, and deeply unsettling. "This is incredible," Ben whispered to Elise as they moved through the crowd. "I don't know how you manage this." Elise just smiled, her eyes glittering under the low lights. "You wanted to be here, right? Consider it a gift." Ben tried to relax, enjoying the buzz of excitement as he took in the scene. Every corner seemed to hum with secrets, hidden beneath layers of luxury and charm. There was a buzz of anticipation in the air, as though the guests were all waiting for something to happen. Ben felt like he was on the edge of a cliff, waiting to see what lay at the bottom. As he and Elise moved through the crowd, Ben noticed something odd. Several guests seemed to glance his way, watching him with curious expressions before turning back to their conversations. A few exchanged knowing glances, nodding subtly as he passed. He felt a chill crawl up his spine. He was just a journalist. There was no reason for anyone here to recognize him, especially not the likes of Hollywood royalty. The evening stretched on, and as they mingled, Ben began to notice a pattern among the guests. Every so often, a small group would slip away, disappearing down a hallway or behind a door. The longer he watched, the more he realized these people weren't just sneaking away to avoid the crowd. They were going somewhere, together with a purpose. Ben's instincts buzzed with curiosity and suspicion. Something was happening beneath the surface of this party, something he couldn't quite grasp. Elise seemed to sense his unease, resting a hand on his arm. "Relax," she murmured, a smile playing on her lips. "You're here to have fun, remember?" Before he could respond, a hush fell over the crowd. The soft music faded, and all eyes turned toward the entrance as Diddy himself walked in, dressed in an immaculate black suit. He moved with the ease of someone who owned not only the room but everyone in it. His gaze swept across the crowd, a confident, almost predatory glint in his eyes. And when his eyes met Ben's, Diddy's lips curved into a faint, knowing smirk. "Thank you all for being here tonight." Diddy's voice carried easily through the room, calm but powerful. "Tonight, we celebrate not only a birthday but the spirit of dedication and loyalty, those who know what it means to make sacrifices to reach the top." The guests erupted into applause, but Ben felt a heavy weight settle in his stomach. He glanced at Elise, who was smiling, looking completely at ease. As the night went on, the crowd relaxed once more, laughter and music filling the room. Yet Ben couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Hours passed, and Ben was just starting to consider slipping away to explore the house when Elise touched his arm, her eyes bright with excitement. "Come with me," she whispered, taking his hand. "There's something I want to show you." He followed her through the crowd, letting her lead him down a long, dimly lit hallway, far from the laughter and lights of the party. They passed closed doors, their steps echoing in the silence. Ben's curiosity spiked, but he couldn't ignore the unease gnawing at his gut. "Elise, where are we going?" he asked, trying to keep his tone light. "You'll see," she replied, a faint smile on her lips. "You've always wanted to know what goes on behind the scenes, haven't you?" She pushed open a large set of double doors, revealing a dimly lit lounge decorated in deep, shadowy tones. Seated in an oversized armchair in the center of the room was Diddy, his gaze sharp and focused as he watched them enter. "Ladies and gentlemen, our guest of honor," Diddy said, his tone smooth, his smile as sharp as a blade. Ben glanced around, heart pounding, but they were alone with Diddy. He felt trapped, yet his curiosity held him in place. "Ben," Diddy said, leaning back with an air of quiet satisfaction, "do you know how many people would kill to be in your place right now?" Ben swallowed, his mouth dry. I'm honored to be here," he managed, his voice trembling slightly. Diddy's smile widened. "Good. It's rare that we get someone who doesn't belong in our world to attend one of these parties. You're a guest, Ben, but you're also something more. Someone with the right kind of curiosity." Ben's heart pounded as he glanced at Elise, searching her face for reassurance. But Elise's gaze was fixed on Diddy, her expression calm and unreadable. "Elise, what's going on?" he whispered, dread twisting in his gut. She turned to him, her eyes cold and distant. "You wanted to know what it was like behind the scenes, didn't you, Ben? Well, tonight you'll see everything." Diddy's eyes sparkled with dark amusement as he rose from his chair, his movements slow and deliberate. "Ben, you've been watching us, prying into our secrets, writing your little stories. You think you understand power?" Ben took a step back, his mind racing. This was wrong. All wrong. "Elise, you set me up?" His voice shook with disbelief. "Why?" Elise's expression softened, almost sympathetic. "It's what this world demands, Ben. You've spent so long chasing after our secrets, but you never understood the cost." Diddy stepped closer, his presence filling the room, and Ben could feel the air grow colder, the lights dimming as a heavy, unnatural energy seeped into the room. "You thought you were here to observe us," Diddy murmured, his tone almost gentle. "But tonight you're here for something far more personal." Panic surged through Ben, but when he tried to move, Elise's hand tightened on his arm, holding him in place with a strength that startled him. He felt the blood drain from his face as he realized he was trapped, surrounded. "Please, don't do this," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Elise's gaze softened, but there was no warmth in her eyes. "This is the cost of getting too close. Hollywood doesn't just give its secrets away, Ben. You have to pay for them." Diddy's hand rested on Ben's shoulder, his grip like iron, and Ben felt a wave of cold spread through his body. It was as if something was draining him, his strength, his energy, his very life slipping away as Diddy held him. The last thing Ben saw before his vision blurred was Elise's face, calm and distant, watching as he was pulled into the darkness. In his final moments, Ben understood the terrible truth. He had come looking for a story, but he had been the story all along. Elise had led him here step by step, and now he was just another sacrifice, another secret buried in Hollywood's shadows, a cautionary tale for anyone who dared to pry too deeply into the darkness.